Me okay? Hi, I'm MeLissa Eason, artist member and advisory council member of Ghost Town Arts Collective. This is my first time leading the Grub and Gab series and my first time using Facebook Live, so be patient with me here. If you haven't attended one of these before, Jared has done a great job leading interesting discussions on art-related topics Friday at noon. Today we're going to talk about a subject that comes up often, not just in the arts, but in all facets of life. Feel free to make comments as I go through. So when someone does something morally problematic, can we and should we be able to judge their work separately from the artists themselves? The presentation was named Separating the Art from the Artist, but it probably should be, can we separate the art from the artist? Okay, an example that comes to mind is with Bill Cosby. And I'm sure that most, if not all, are familiar with the numerous allegations and court cases that Cosby has been dealing with since 2004. He's been accused by at least 50 women of drugging or attempted drugging and rape. During his career, he has been involved with many successful television shows, stand-up comedy, commercials, and has authorized books for adults and children. In the TV show I Spy, he held the first dramatic lead role for a Black actor. His most popular television show was The Cosby Show, a family show with lead Black actors that broke through racial stereotypes. He also encouraged a foundation, he formed a foundation to fund teachers of special education classes, and he encouraged youth to go for higher education degrees. So for those that don't know, I am a librarian, so I'm going to mention the discussion that has happened in libraries as a result of Cosby's trials. Libraries do not typically remove books because of an author's actions or when someone finds a book offensive. A patron who has an issue with a book can fill out a form requesting that a book be removed or moved to another section, but they have to give a reason why. However, the library ultimately has the final say. Libraries should report these complaints each year. So each year, American Library Association Intellectual Freedom Office compiles a list of the books that have been reported with the most complaints and what the complaints were for. So according to a New York Times article, Cosby's children's books about Little Bill that were kind of loosely based on his childhood, they first came out in 1997, but they made it to the 2016 list of top 10 most challenged books that year, though it had never been on the list before. And the reason this is significant is that this was the first time since they began compiling lists in 1990 that the books were disputed because of the author's actions rather than the book's content. So, there you go. There's a picture of Little Bill there, and there was a TV show and a series of books that came out around Little Bill. So, as a consumer, should we still watch The Cosby Show? Does anyone have a comment on that?
So, from my perspective, the answer to that specific question is, this is on an individual basis of discernment. Like if I'm at home and I'm scrolling through the TV guide on Dish Network and there's the Cosby Show, I individually discern if I'm going to continue to support, that mode of this person's expression or not.
Right, and could you hear Jared okay? Okay, so, basically he's saying that it should be up to the individual, not to me to decide that, it's not available on Netflix or not available on whatever platform.
No, that's getting into, so.
That's a different thing, no.
Yeah, right, and maybe, it seems to me like individually, so I may as an individual, I may or may not be aware of anything going on in Bill Cosby's life. I mean, if I don't pay attention to the media and I don't, or I do, I know or I don't know, but I'm scrolling through and based on the life experience I've lived, whether or not. But then when you talk about a company or a nonprofit library?
Yeah, like us. Should
Is
I?
that the next question?
No, it really wasn't. But I've got several questions, but that was not one of them. But it's kind of similar. So it stars Bill Cosby, and he's the main character, and the show shares his name. So can we watch the show without thinking of the things that he has done? If we are familiar with his background, can you now watch the show and not think about the crimes or can you separate him from his current life, the show from his current life? Does anyone feel one way or another?
Well, I absolutely can, as an individual person, Jared Trevler.
Yes.
I have the capacity to do that.
Well,
will I or would I? I don't know if I know.
Those are different things.
Yeah. But I think some people, I think what you're asking is, because not everybody maybe can say that. Like,
right.
If they know what he's done, maybe they are having an emotional response that's different from mine.
Or based on their experiences.
Yeah, maybe they would decide, or maybe they would have a stronger emotional reaction in the direction of not tuning in. I don't know.
Right, and he has obviously made contributions to arts, and how do we handle those contributions? I mean, being the first Black lead on a dramatic show and having a show with a financially successful Black family that came into the homes of middle-class, white families for the first time. I mean, those are accomplishments. Do we ignore those, or do we continue to acknowledge those as well?
I like that point, and I'm sorry we spoke with them. Not to, I won't get to experience Claire Huxtable. Right,
the rest of the people involved in the show. There's a lot of people.
Yeah.
A lot of people involved in the production and everything.
Like going back to Jared's point, I personally did a little research, not about Bill Cosby, but about Michael Jackson, and I was separating his allegations from his own music. And I did I asked a lot of people questions, and they said, even though he has been doing all these bad things, I still wouldn't personally put that in. The music is music, and I'm not gonna not listen to those allegations. Like, people have different opinions. Like, either you don't want to listen to them, I'll still continue.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. It's whether you can separate them. And how about, should the shows still be in reruns on television and for sale in stores? Or for instance, we check out things at the library. We've got them, we've got seasons of the Cosby Show that still check out. So
yeah, so I think this is fascinating.
Separating the artist, and Cosby as an example, because he's
well, can you oh, sorry, you were making a comment because he was criminal.
Heard you put your 2 cents in.
Sorry. I can hear you a little bit.
Who is that?
That's Marlise.
Ask her to repeat.
Can you repeat? Was she trying?
I'm sorry, I didn't say anything. I was just listening. I thought I had it on mute. It said I was on mute. Sorry.
That's all right.
Okay, and I want to ask Tom, can you hear me? Okay. So I think this is where this conversation gets interesting, because you've taken it from the level of an individual discernment to a level of social discernment.
Mm-hmm.
And as a private company, like let's say on Netflix, maybe that's a publicly traded company, but there's a board of directors, and the board of directors, or the CEO, the executive board, someone, if confronted with this question, someone is going to make a values judgment on behalf of the organization of Netflix.
Right.
So, and I think
that's probably financial based.
That's where it gets interesting. How do you define what the organization's values are, and how more or less objective does that group want to be in that moment of facing that decision?
Right, because they're basically giving their opinion when they decide to provide it or not provide it. They're kind of saying whether they approve or not.
Well, and representing that group of people
Mhm.
to make that discernment.
That's what I was going to say, MeLissa, is then you're getting into the private market and private businesses, whether they're publicly traded or not, for-profit private institutions that are market-based, making decisions about what they think is best for their company. And then the public, their customers, will validate or not with the decision that they made. I mean, we used to say, if you don't like a show that's on TV, there's the on and off switch and you just turn it off. Well, if people are mad about Netflix showing the Cosby Show or whatever other example, they don't have to watch. And if they don't watch, the ratings go down, and that translates into reduced profits. And then, I mean, it rolls through, and, the market either punishes or rewards. I know I'm an investment person, so that's the way I think, but still, I mean, that's how we most easily express even before social media, when we could get everybody whipped up and riled up, in a matter of minutes. The other way to express your opinion about an issue like this is watch or don't. So
You vote with your wallet, or
exactly.
and with the number of viewers, like you said.
Right.
So let me get to the next one here. Roman Polanski, film director, actor, writer, pled guilty to drugging and raping a teenage girl, but fled before sentencing. Harvey Weinstein, movie producer, is currently in prison for rape and sexual assault. While you are not as likely to see The Cosby Show in reruns on TV, Polanski and Weinstein's movies remain popular. We can probably watch their movies without thinking of the men involved because they are behind the scenes, even though their art is very much part of the films. It is more difficult, I think, with The Cosby Show because you see him on screen, and so he is connected with it. So does anyone agree? I mean, do you agree with that sentiment, or do you think that is why? I mean, I know Pulp Fiction was on TV a couple of weeks ago, and like Rosemary's Baby continues, Good Will Hunting, all of those movies continue to be popular. And also, like you said, there are lots of people involved, just like any other show.
So you're asking, like, if we compare and contrast Bill Cosby and his situation relative to his show with Polanski and Weinstein, because they are less visible as part of the final, you don't see them as part of the final result of the
Yes.
art.
Do you agree that that might make it easier to separate them from the art, or from the things that they make?
Is it easier? Okay.
Well, also, you made a good point earlier about the other actors in the Cosby Show, and how we want to have the benefit of of their performances and stuff, despite what he did. It's the same thing here. I mean, there's with Weinstein. I mean, in his whole time as a producer or whatever, I mean, a lot of really highly regarded, famous actors and actresses had their careers made by him. And so, should they be punished for what he did? I mean, Gwyneth Paltrow, people like that come to mind that he, if it hadn't been for him, we wouldn't even probably know them. Of course, then there's the question of, did they know what he was up to and they just turned a blind eye? But regardless, I mean, how far do you carry it, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Right. Did his actions help make him where it would help keep him successful because of the way his actions helped him to make the movie successful?
Right. I mean, it's really messy. It gets really messy.
It does.
I get a sense that some people almost view their focus, attention on, like, let's say, as an example, someone becomes aware of Weinstein and his behavior, and it almost as if they feel like if they give attention to that film, they are enabling his behavior and his life because of their support of that product. Like, oh, now he has money where he can do things. And so if I withdraw my attention from it or don't watch it, he'll make less money, and we're taking his capacity to produce away from him, right?
Right.
And so it's almost like they say, if they join the larger group of people who are boycotting the product, his notoriety gets withdrawn. He will no longer be able to find support in Hollywood for people to contribute money to continue. So by joining this group that boycott, we are taking away his ability to create.
Right.
And that's his punishment or his removal from society as a punishment for his behavior.
Right. So,
But it's not easier for me personally, answering your original question, it's not any different for me personally to either separate them or not in those two, like
okay.
Cosby versus Weinstein. For me personally, it's like the same mental, emotional process that I would go through either way.
See, I would say probably the opposite, only because I don't know movies. I don't know producers. So I could watch a movie and not realize that that's who the producer was.
Yeah.
Just because I don't know that much about movies. So whereas someone else might recognize the style of the film being the style of that particular artist, because they definitely, each film producer has their own style, but I wouldn't necessarily pick up on those things. But well, it may seem easy enough to have, view of moral absolutism, or where you think that, avoid works from artists that commit crimes we find heinous, or from artists that have expressed racist or homophobic views. What is right is right and what's wrong is wrong. These are extreme examples. So I think, and you see how complicated they are. So then when you get into other offenses, where do you draw the line? The actor Johnny Depp was accused of domestic assault against his girlfriend. Do we watch his movies? Musical artist Jerry Lee Lewis married his 13-year-old cousin, yet we sing along to Great Balls of Fire. So who decides which offenses are unforgivable? Is it a general consensus by society that votes them out? Is there a time period to wait for people to forget?
Well, that's what I was about to say. The time period thing, should you consider what was acceptable at the time by those standards versus what is acceptable now, right? I mean, I'm sure some of our founding fathers owned slaves. Well, do we completely, obviously that's abhorrent to us now, slavery, but back then it was legal and I guess acceptable by some people. I think of John Kennedy. We revere him, and he was assassinated and it was a national tragedy. But I also think about all the stories about his womanizing and the affairs that he carried on and all of that. Well, back in the 50s and early 60s, maybe a lot of men did that, and it was a little bit more kind of, you turn a blind eye and, oh, that's just boys being boys or whatever. But now I think our standards are different. So where do you incorporate the standards of the day now versus what they were back then? That's a whole nother issue, I guess.
Yeah, do we put our standards on, today's standards on people of the past? Yeah.
Right.
So how about when the offender is no longer alive and is a beloved artist, beloved, and has not physically hurt anyone? So for over 20 years, teachers and school children have celebrated Read Across America around the birthday of Theodore Seuss Geisel, better known as Dr. Seuss, cartoonist, author, and illustrator. Though many classrooms still focus on Seuss for that Read Across America, in recent years, there's been an organized effort by the National Education Association to shift away from the works of Seuss to a theme that's celebrating diverse American experiences. So when I mention Seuss to most people, they're at least somewhat aware or familiar with his early career, where he wrote and performed minstrel and blackface, or where he expressed racist and anti-Semitic views in cartoons. But they tend to dismiss the concern, saying that he changed his views later in life, because, just look at the book The Sneetches. It's all about groups getting along. And but when you actually look at his works a little more closely, in a study of, there was a study done, which it'll be in the notes if you want to look at it, but written throughout his career, it it looked at 2,240 of the characters he created. Of those 2,240 characters, 45 are characters of color, from what you can, from what you can tell, of course, from the cartoons, and they are all male. So, for instance, and to think I saw it on Mulberry Street, I guess let me skip forward here. And to think I saw it on Mulberry Street, there's an Asian man running in a silk robe with slits for eyes and holding a bowl of rice and chopsticks. And there are two shirtless African men in grass skirts carrying an animal in If I Ran the Zoo. So it is easy to say they are children's books with cute pictures and rhymes. Why do people have to bring race into it? Why are we counting the number of, people of color in cartoon, in children's books? Or they say that he's a product of his time. While it's not been difficult for me to avoid Cosby just because I don't see him much in anything, I don't see him much in, watch many of his shows. It has been far more difficult for me to let go of Dr. Seuss. Myself, my children, and people everywhere learn to read with his books. And are they the best books for teaching, or are there better ones to use? There are a lot of children's books out there now that would probably teach the same thing. But I think that the reason why we have trouble letting go of Seuss is because we're nostalgic for our childhood or for our children's childhood. And so there are many children's books that aren't as problematic. And are we soiling his image by pointing out these issues? Is his work an opportunity to teach? So I don't know if anyone was familiar with, all of the work of Dr. Seuss. So seeing these images, would you still want to read them to your children? For instance, if I Ran the Zoo, and I don't know if you can see the black characters here. If those would be a concern. Is anybody feeling on the children's books?
So, is there an implication being made that image or that these three, there's something derogatory about them, or
that they are racial stereotypes, and that they're he has people with turbans. I think 29 of the characters were people with turbans, but yet we don't really know what country they're from. They're just some abstract stereotype of someone he has decided, to be a character.
Of the story, is there, in the tone of the story relative to the ways that these characters participate, is the tone derogatory?
I don't think so. I mean, I don't know that there's much mention of the characters themselves, so it's more in the images,
if I were
probably.
In a situation, if I were if I had children, or if I were deciding whether or not these were okay to use to tell a story, I think my question would be: is there something, some expression of derogatory or any negative emotion directed at or relative to the characters in the exposition of the story?
I'm sorry.
You can take a word, like I can say words to you, MeLissa, as though and the words are very kind words, but I can say them in a derogatory tone, and I'm using them to hurt you. So, like, if these could be presented in an endearing way, like maybe they represent people that the author from his experience really cared about, and he incorporated them into the story in an endearing, positive.
Yeah, it's just that when are we holding on to the views of celebrating the views of someone with racist views when there are when we can be celebrating more diverse authors and even less problematic books? I mean, that's because there's a lot of great children's books that I would say are just as much fun to read as Dr. Seuss, but he's just so ingrained in our system.
I guess what I'm saying is, my answer would be, I don't understand why you use the word problematic 3 times. unless there's something derogatory, I don't know why this is problematic. I would say yes and yes, celebrate every great piece of literature. Like, how did we decide that, in observation of how this story is told, how did we decide it's a problem?
Well, I don't particularly like racial stereotypes, and that whenever I see someone, well, yeah, the fact that he's holding a bowl of rice, I mean, why would he be running with a bowl and chopsticks? And I mean, we're in traditional, you know, like, I don't know, it just doesn't seem like a very good representation to me.
MeLissa,
Yes.
this is Rebecca Yavner. I think it's along the lines of that was the time then, how things were viewed, kind of like when the lady got on the bus and sat in the front when she was supposed to sit in the back. You know, it was the times then are not necessarily our times now. So we should.
So do we keep celebrating the past despite that? Do we keep celebrating those things that when there are positive, you know, more positive examples now?
I think
I think the positive examples should take precedence because times change. And unfortunately, when you have things that are looked at and they could be construed as racist or what have you, like that middle picture with the chopsticks, times have changed. We don't look at this kind of thing anymore as an acceptable viewpoint. So you need to pick better books that are acceptable today.
MeLissa,
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to say, I think we don't have to look, it doesn't have to be an all or nothing proposition in my mind. I mean, you could, if you think that these books were good tools for teaching your kids to read or for getting them to enjoy reading. I mean, when you have kids, you realize half the battle is just getting them to find something they enjoy so they will read instead of it being a chore. But you can also, by reading these books, use it as a teaching opportunity to tell them that this is not necessarily how we pigeonhole or stereotype different races or different people anymore. I mean, because if you don't ever show it to them, they won't even be aware that that's a problem, right? But at least you can show them these books and say, you know, these are great books when I was a kid. I still love them. But maybe you need to know, child, that, you know, these are not the ways that you necessarily need to look at people today. And so use it as a teaching opportunity, but don't necessarily just throw out the baby with the bathwater, in my opinion.
I think that's. And that's also what I put an opportunity. Is it an opportunity to teach? But you've already covered that as well. Often we remember the artist how we want them to be and not how they were. Sometimes it's more convenient to celebrate their accomplishments. We celebrate the contributions of Pablo Picasso as a genius, a painter, a sculptor, and also he created Cubism. But Jay Perini, a poet and novelist, used Picasso as an example when defending Polanski. He said, "Can one really separate the art from the man or woman who creates the art?" The answer is yes, definitely. There are many examples in history. Too many of the great artists who were terribly flawed human beings, behaving very badly and hurting those around them. If anything, audiences easily make the distinction. Nobody looks at a Picasso painting in a museum these days and says, I should not take this work seriously because Picasso cheated on his many wives and was abusive to his son. So is it more convenient for us to remember him as a genius, uncomplicated by his humanness? And if the viewer approached his art with the knowledge of his background, would it give us new understanding of the works? And again, I don't keep up with my slides here, but. Does anyone have anything to add? Or?
Well, I think again, from an individual perspective, I think we discern what our attitude is going to be. For instance, I mean, I can just say generally where our conversation has gone so far. I've never met a single infallible person in my life experience.
Not yet. No.
Until
Exactly.
No, just kidding.
Yeah. So it doesn't seem fair for me to want to expect someone who has elevated their art to the degree that they're in the public spotlight. I don't feel that it's fair for me to expect them to always get everything right and to present everything that's only appropriate. So I guess there's a little bit of grace that I would want to extend if someone was asking me to directly confront my attitude of the artist separate from the art. I would tend to want to offer that grace. That, you know, they were doing the best with what they had where they were in that time. I think that's a generally true statement with most people.
Yeah, and I think with Picasso, I don't think that I knew much about, I don't remember much about his background, but it definitely makes you look at some of his artwork. You know, if you have an understanding of his view of women, and of course I didn't get into a lot of that, but if you have that view, it kind of gives you a different perspective into his works, I think. So having a little bit of knowledge of his biography, I think would affect.
I agree with that. I think that can be, for me, it would be enriching to know, oh, well, you know, maybe he's actually representing a woman in this painting that subsequently he mistreated, and maybe he was using some sort of substance that made things look like, I mean, I'm just making some of this up, but then when I look at the painting, it just leads me to a deeper, broader understanding of what was happening.
Right.
That led to that way of expressing himself.
Okay, and I'm just going to briefly touch on this because this is a little bit different situation. But Charles Manson, a cult leader who was convicted of murders in 1969, he spent the rest of his life in prison until his death a couple years ago. During his time in prison, he created artwork, which recently went on display for the first time. Then John Wayne Gacy, a children's birthday clown, he tortured and killed 33 men and boys in the 1980s. He was executed for his crimes 25 years ago, but he was a prolific painter both before and after prison. And his paintings can sell for about $50,000. I think his highest one was $175,000, and it was actually of the tunnel where he hid victims or something, I believe. So there is a market for paintings made by murderers. There are sites that auction off the works, museums that show it, and shows about their crimes. So how is it that so many embrace his art, this art, which seems the most heinous?
Is this painting is this a representation of the tunnel?
No, I don't think that one is not on there.
Okay.
This one here, of course, this is Gacy here, his clown, his actual picture, and then this is one of his paintings. He had quite a few of the paintings of himself as Pogo, the clown. And then these are Manson's here.
So when I look at what is presented here without having seen, so what I see here is that there's nothing heinous. If I saw a painting of Manson with dismembered bodies strewn about in the tunnel and his name was signed there, then I would say, ooh, that could negatively affect someone who's experiencing it. But I think your question, state the question again.
How is it that so many embrace this art, which seems the most heinous? And so you're right, those particular works of art are not.
Maybe a question as an elaboration or a supplement to your question is, what makes this so interesting and compelling for some people to want to collect it?
It's a good question.
I mean, these are interesting pieces, generally, but there might be something about the fact that they came from those personalities that some people find intriguing.
Like, how did they get there? What's their thought?
Another question is, culturally, and this changes over time and in different cultures and parts of the world and civilizations, but some cultures are more to inspire the suppression, denial, and disowning of emotions. So if you're someone who lives in a culture where you're having to suppress a broader part of who you are for a long period of time that leads to some psychosis or instability up here, and then the subsequent behavior like these guys. And I don't know their personal stories, but art is a way to transmute inner emotional states outward. And if this behavior, if art had been encouraged earlier in life and they had been encouraged to express those emotional states rather than suppress and deny, maybe the heinous stuff that the crimes they committed maybe wouldn't have been so bad, or they wouldn't have been compelled to do that. I don't know. That's getting into some deep psychology.
Yeah, I had heard that about Adolf Hitler too,
Yeah.
that his artwork, if he had been more successful, would he have been?
I mean, redirect all that energy he had for this stuff that we look back on and we think, gosh, I mean, he had a lot of energy focused toward what he was doing, but redirect that in a different direction, get that energy out and transmute it in a more positive way. That's a cultural thing.
Right. And so back to my earlier question, and I think we've discussed some of all this, but when someone does something morally problematic, can we and should we be able to judge their work separately from the artist themselves?
So I don't want it to be like I'm the only one talking team out there, but I think we can. I think the more compelling question for me is should we? And that's a social question. So for instance, in a context like Ghost Town, which is a nonprofit arts collaborative, board administered. So membership elects 2 boards. The boards are functioning in different ways. So we are charged with representing the members that we support. In the case of the library, you have a board, you serve a community. So really, a decision, when you're talking about a single decision, is like I get to decide for myself if I'm watching Bill Cosby or not. When I'm in a culture, to me, the only way to make that decision is to try to be as inclusive of everyone's point of view. So does that group want to create a platform where all of these different voices can be heard, or should we, as a culture, should we suppress voices that we collectively decide are morally irreprehensible? We don't want the tone of that thing or that person in this place that we're making, right?
Right.
And that's hard.
It is, yeah. And there's not one blanket answer, I don't think.
I think you're right. There is not one blanket answer, but there is, you have to look at the freedom of speech. So artwork can be considered a speech, a form of speech. This is how I want to represent myself. And I think the freedom of speech goes into whether or not the individual wants to receive that, right? So again, they can choose not to listen, not to watch, not to look. They can choose. It's not being forced upon them. But in a consequence of a group function, for example, the library, is the library going to allow such and such artists to have their artwork on the walls because of X number of history, right? That is a group function. Would the library get together as a group and determine that based on their own beliefs? And since you're private enterprise, you can do that. But I do not believe that, for example, these pictures that are up on the thing here where Manson has created these pictures, those are his way of speaking. That's his way of saying, hey, this is what I'm doing now. And if people want to have that, to have it on their walls, to pay $25,000 for a painting that Manson did, that is up to them.
That makes sense to me.
Very good point. I'm sorry, I've forgotten your name.
That's Rebecca.
Rebecca. Yeah, I think I was trying to, you said it maybe more eloquently than I, but then so let's say MeLissa had an exhibition at the library of Manson's paintings. I, as a community member, or maybe I can't put her in that role. She's representing the library, which is a larger group, but I can either decide I'm going to go to the library and subject myself to giving my attention to the painting or not. I can either pull Dr. Seuss's book off the shelf or not. Do I have the right as a community member of the community served by the library to request that no one have the opportunity to read that book.
Right.
I think I wouldn't want to go there. I would want to give people the ability to find that book and look at it if they wanted to.
Right, and that's kind of the library's take on it as well.
Yeah.
We hope that that people won't steal a book or or try to dispute a book simply because they don't agree with what's being said.
Yeah, it would be considered censorship at that point.
Correct. So, and from all this, you probably realize that I don't have a real answer to it. I don't think anyone does. And I can't say that I'm one way or the other. You noticed I kind of argued either way, depending on what the response was, or, made comments the other way. What I do think is important is that we not allow artists to get away with bad behaviors because they are successful artists. But that's a whole nother topic. But an example of this is like if I painted a picture of, my child, the picture might evoke feelings from me, from experiences and from things that I know about the child and things that I have been through with them, or, from what I know. However, as a viewer, if you were to see that piece of artwork, I cannot tell you that picture should bother you because of this, or you should feel glad when you see it. I cannot, I can't make you feel a certain way about something simply because that is my opinion of the situation myself, because each of us has a different connection to the artwork, just as Dr. Seuss or Cosby. We've all been through different experiences with those artists that have brought us to this point. So that's kind of where I'll leave it. Does anyone have anything else to add? I'm finished.
Well, thank you, Melissa. This has been really stimulating for me and really well put together, the whole presentation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
I think one thing that has become more, has come more to the forefront of my mind and imagination during our talk so far today is, and I wasn't expecting this necessarily, but I think there's a phenomenon culturally when someone creates something that powerfully affects a larger audience of people, so they become famous. So as a famous actor or a famous author or a famous artist, once they become famous, then we get our magnifying glasses on and start scrutinizing them to a degree that that maybe isn't always fair. I think from my perspective, the statement you made that we shouldn't let people get away with heinous crimes because they're an artist is absolutely true. If the culture has decided that these are the laws of our land and we prosecute people for committing these crimes, of course, I think that everyone should be held to the same laws and standards. It doesn't make sense that because you're a wealthy Hollywood producer that you get to be exonerated from things, and you can buy your way out of this or that. That's corrupt. But the idea for me, like I will continue to celebrate Dr. Seuss, and I'm not going to avoid the Cosby Show because I don't think it's fair to scrutinize them to a more harsh standard because they're an artist and because they became famous. And maybe that's just the empath in me wanting to understand that no one is perfect, everyone is fallible. So that's where I am with it. And I also think there's something, for me, I've learned in my life experience that the more I'm exposed to, the more I learn and understand, the more rich my life experience is. It doesn't mean that I have to agree with everything that I look at, but if I can at least be exposed to it, I become a better citizen of humanity to a degree. And so I like the idea that stuff is out there and available for us to encounter, to enrich ourselves, even if sometimes we look at things that most people consider to be not so good or representative of someone who did something bad. So that's where I am.
Right, and on that point, I saw something the other day that said, is it the job of art to make us feel good? I mean, that's
Sometimes.
real, well, but it's not across the board though. It's
Not always.
yeah. So I do have some reading that you can do about the subject. And actually these were only a few of them. It's just, I'm really slow at putting them in their proper format. So if you would like any of the others, I will try to add those to the list as well. It's an interesting topic, and there are, there's so many different cases and so many different people involved that it's just interesting to read their stories and what goes into their art. So, right.
And to supplement what MeLissa has said, so she can make these available, and we're going to try to do a better job with uploading the recordings of each presentation and maybe indexing them on the website. So if anyone wanted to go and find it to take a look at again or to share with someone else, we need to do a better job at organizing ourselves and making them available for everyone. So we'll work on that.
Well, and I don't know about everyone else, but I don't get many opportunities to discuss things in depth. And so I think these have been great. Fridays at noon, we have these discussions about, something a little more serious. You go through your day-to-day stuff. You don't typically have these types of conversations. So it's been a nice change of pace, I think. So.
Agreed.
All right. Anything else before we go?
Thank you, MeLissa.
Well, thank you.
I enjoyed that very much.
Oh, good. Good.
Very thoughtful. Thank you.
Well, thanks. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
So we're working on next week. There's a couple of ideas that we'll try to post early next week so you know what's coming. And then the following week, which I think is June 12th, is Hunt Tooley, and he's going to teach us about mind mapping, and it leads to greater organization and efficiency, and I really need it, and it's going to be really great. So be sure and tune in. And we're going to do this every Friday, so we're always here. Anytime you have a free Friday, join us.
Yeah, in the building or online.
Right.
Thanks, Jared.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Enjoy your weekends.